this video, we are going to learn how to make a model turnaround. We'll also take a look at some render settings that will give you good quality while also giving you decent render times. Let's start off with actually seeing which area of our model will be seen in the final render. We can do this by clicking on this icon right here called resolution gate, and that'll sort of create a frame around your object that will show up in the final render. So if you go to Arnold Render, you will see that what we see here is exactly what we see in your viewport. And you can also turn on gate mask to mask out everything else and just be able to focus on this aspect of it. Once you set that up, you need to make sure you get the right angle for your model. This is up to you, whichever angle looks best. Move your camera around and set an angle. I would suggest starting off at something that's a little more 3D instead of making it a full frontal view like this. Start off at something that's a little more 3/4. And have a background. Make sure you have your background and that none of your sky dome or rest of your environment is seen. You just want to be able to see the model. Leave enough space on the top and bottom. Get as close as possible, but leave enough space on the top and bottom so that you have some breathing room in your video. Once you do that, you can change the render settings. To do this, go up to Windows, Rendering Editors, and Render Settings. In the render settings, the first thing we're going to change is the file output section. In this section, we're just changing one thing, and that is that we want to render out a video. So you want to set the naming convention for that. By default, it's set to render out a single frame. I'm going to set it to the third option in the dropdown, name.number.extension, which will render out multiple frames with the PNG extension. The next thing we're going to change is our start and end frames in the frame range section. So set your start frame to 0 and your end frame to 120. And that's going to make sure we render out these frames. And then go to image size and set this to HD 1080. That's going to give you an image that is 1920 by 1080. You can also change the resolution if you want to. You can set it to 100 or a little higher. This will increase render time, and sometimes your image might be really big, so I'll leave it at the default. But if you notice a lot of pixelation and you want to go a little higher quality, you could set this to 100 or 150. And that's all for this section. The next thing we do is we go to the Arnold Renderer options. And in here, we are going to change these settings. So by default, I think the camera AA is set to 2. Change it to 4 or 5. This increases render time exponentially, so you don't want it to be too high. I usually like 4 or 5 for pretty good quality, and I go to 6 if I want very high quality renders. So set it to any value between 4 to 6. I'm going to leave it at 5. And then change the diffuse, specular, and transmission. Diffuse is your base color, specular is all the highlights on your object, and transmission is for glass. Not all of you are going to have glass, so you might not have to change this, but anyone who has glass, this is also a factor. You might notice noise on your glass. Glass especially brings up a lot of noise in renders, so you can increase the transmission to get rid of that. So now these three, the diffuse, specular, and transmission, are good to increase when you are rendering. So 3 is a pretty good number for this, but if you still get noise, you can go one level higher and not increase your render time too much. With these settings, it's always a balance of getting a good quality image while also not having each frame render for like 15 minutes. So once you set these settings up, you can close out your render settings. And you can check. So usually I keep checking this image and make sure that I'm getting good quality. You'll notice that it takes time to load. You can see a loading bar at the bottom. And once this is at 100%, the loading bar will disappear. So when you're taking renders, just wait for the loading bar to go away before actually saving this image. So even if you're taking individual renders, just wait for this to finish and then go to File, Save Image to save it out. So this is what my render looks like now. I think it is it's going to be a pretty good quality render once this finishes loading. So I'm going to close this out and now focus on my timeline. So for a video that is showing a full turnaround of the object, 5 seconds is usually a good amount of time, and that is 120 frames. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your timeline has 120 frames. So we start off at 0. Go to the timeline and type in 0 into this box and type in 120 into this box if you don't have that set up already. And then you'll have to also move your slider so that it covers the full 120 frames. And once you do that, you should see 0 to 120 on your timeline. And I have already animated this, so I'm going to remove that animation so that I can start from scratch. So this is what most of you will have. So I'm going to start from here. So we set up our timeline and we have frame 0 to 120. We also need to set the playback speed. So if we right click and go to playback speed, we can set this to real time. A lot of you might have it set to play every frame free. That is the default in Maya, but set it to real time to see a real time preview of what your animation is going to look like. Once you do that, you might have added keyframes to your object by mistake while modeling. So make sure to select your whole object, everything in your scene, and check your channel box. So the channel box is right here. Make sure to check this and see if you see any red bars here. And if you see red bars, that means that you have added keyframes by mistake. So just select all of these attributes. So shift click to select everything, right click and break connections. And that's going to get rid of the keyframes on any objects you might have set it on. And now you'll be able to animate your group. Let's go to the group arcade. Most of you should have a group with all your arcade parts inside it. Before doing anything else, just go to edit, delete all by type history, just to make sure you don't have any leftover history. And now for your group, you want to check these values right here. So you might have moved your objects with the group selected at some point. So you might have some numbers here. And when you're doing the animation, you want to ideally start with a group that has no values. So we can put this group inside a second group. So go to edit and group or Control G to make another group. So I have my arcade here and I have another group above that. I can call this, let's double click and turn around animation. And you'll notice that this group has all values of 0 and the scale of it is set to 1, which is what we want. Once you set the group, to move the gizmo to the center of our object, we can go to Modify and Center Pivot with the group selected. So now your gizmo is in the right place and you removed all extra keyframes. You should be able to animate this. So select the group and go to frame 0 and type S on the keyboard to create your first keyframe. So you've created a keyframe at 0 that starts with 0 rotation. Then go to frame 120 and click on E on your keyboard to bring up the rotation icon and rotate your object until it is rotated 360 degrees. You'll notice that the rotate Y attribute is the one that we're affecting. So I can just type in 360 here and type S again. So now we've created one keyframe at 0, one at 360. And then we just play it back. And this is what it's going to look like. You'll have an animated turntable of your object. Just check your object and make sure that no parts of it are like going out of frame. Make sure you have enough space at the top and bottom. And once you set this up, you have your render settings set up. So you can check this once again to make sure everything looks good. And then you can render the sequence. To render the sequence, go up to this menu on the top left and change this to rendering. It will be in modeling for most of you, but we want to change this to rendering to be able to see all the render menu options. And once you do that, you can go to render and render sequence options. By default, this is going to render the perspective camera. If you've used a different camera to set up your file, you can select that from the dropdown. I've done perspective, which you can see right here. And this is by default going to go to the images section of your project. So if I click on this folder, you'll see it redirects me to the images section of my arcade game project. This is a good place to put your render files in, but if you do want to set an alternate output location, then you can choose that. Don't set your output location to an external hard drive or an external pen drive. Make sure it is local to the computer that you're working on. And that's mostly the settings that you need to have. Keep in mind that once you start this, once you hit render sequence, Maya is going to freeze, your whole computer is going to freeze, and it's going to go through the process of rendering frames 0 to 120. This could take an hour or two depending on how high your quality is and how good your computer is. There is no standard time for this. It really depends on the computer. So be aware of that when you start the render process. Once you start it, you might have to close Maya out. If you want to stop it, you might have to use the task manager to close Maya, or you might have to hit escape a lot to be able to escape the render. So I would set this up and maybe go take a break while this renders out. And it should take an hour or two at the most for a lot of you. And once you have the frames 0 to 120, you can put them together in Premiere Pro or Media Encoder to get your final animation and upload that as a video on YouTube.